I'm Torin, a software engineer who once thought life was perfect with Claire and our daughters, Lily and Ava, in an apartment drenched in salty sea breeze. That is, until I caught her tangled with Miles, her best friend, right on our balcony where waves once roared our vows. Claire didn't beg. She coolly pitched an open marriage, then confessed to 18 months of deceit behind my back. My heart felt ripped apart. But I didn't break. I dated Sophie, Miles's sister, a photographer whose gaze cuts through like light through a lens. Claire went mad, screaming, stalking, twisting her own open marriage game to fight me for Lily and Ava in court. Then secrets exploded. Claire had sabotaged my career, Miles admitted she'd puppeteered him, and Lily stabbed her mother with, "Dad's happier now." This is a storm of betrayal, jealousy, and twists that'll make your hair stand on end. From a man stabbed in the back, I rode the waves to reclaim my life. Want to see Claire crumble? Watch me rise? Hear my story. You won't be disappointed. The sea was a restless beast that afternoon, its waves gnashing at the shore beneath our apartment like teeth on bone. I'd broken my routine, a rarity for a software engineer like me, Torin, who thrives on the predictable pulse of code and logic. Today, though, I'd left work early, clutching a fistful of wildflowers, daisies and sea lavender, plucked on a whim to surprise Claire, my wife of 12 years. I pictured her smile, that crooked curve I'd chased since we were sunburned kids on this very coast. The elevator hummed upward, carrying me to our sanctuary by the sea, to Lily and Ava, our girls, to a life I'd coded with care. The door clicked open, and a silence stung my skin. No rustle of Claire's design sketches, no giggles from the kids, just the wind howling through the open balcony doors, sharp with salt and something sour. Then, I saw them. Claire, her auburn hair cascading over bare shoulders, locked in a tangle with Miles, her college confidant, the man who'd raised a glass at our wedding with a grin I'd once called brotherly. They were entwined on the balcony, the sea's roar a cruel chorus to the vows we'd etched into this place. The flowers slipped from my hand, petals fluttering to the floor like ash from a burned dream. My chest seized, a roar rising in my throat, but before it could escape, Claire turned. Her hazel eyes met mine, cool and unyielding, as if I'd stumbled into her boardroom. She eased away from Miles, smoothing her blouse with a designer's precision. "Torin," she said, her voice flat as a blueprint. "We need to talk." Miles scrambled with his shirt, his hands trembling as he avoided my glare. A flicker of shame, or maybe just cowardice. "I'll go," he muttered, but Claire raised a hand. "Stay," she commanded, and he froze, a shadow pinned by her will. I stood there, the wildflowers wilting underfoot, as she glided to the counter with the grace of the interior designer she was, always composing, always in charge. "I've been thinking," she began, leaning back as if presenting a client pitch. "We should try an open marriage." The words hit like a breaker, dragging the air from my lungs. Open marriage? My mind reeled to my grandparents, their wrinkled hands laced on a pier at dusk, their love a bedrock I'd built my world on. Was she serious? Or was this some twisted test I'd already failed? "An open marriage?" I rasped, the sea's growl swallowing my disbelief. She nodded, her tone as casual as if she were suggesting a new wall color. "It's modern, Torin. Liberating. We can both have what we want." Her gaze flicked to Miles, and the knife twisted. This wasn't a whim. It was a scaffold to prop up her betrayal while keeping me in the frame. My fists balled, nails cutting crescents into my palms, but the front door slammed open before I could speak. Lily charged in, 10 years of wildfire in her step, backpack swinging. "Dad, you're home!" she shouted, then stopped, her sharp eyes darting from me to Claire to Miles. Ava waddled in behind, 6 and blissfully unaware, waving a crumpled drawing. "Look, Daddy!" she beamed, thrusting it at me, a stick-figure family under a wonky sun. I crouched, pulling Ava close, her warmth a tether against the storm shredding my chest. "It's perfect, sweetheart," I murmured, my eyes locked on Claire. Lily lingered, brow furrowed. "Why's Uncle Miles here again?" she asked, her voice a blade through the stillness. Claire's laugh rang out, too polished, too thin. "Just a visit, Lilybug. Go wash up." But Lily's gaze flicked to the crushed flowers, then back to me, a puzzle forming in her mind. I nudged Ava toward her. "Go on, girls," I said, my throat a knot. They shuffled off, Lily's steps slow, her silence louder than words. The room shrank, Miles shifting awkwardly as Claire faced me. "How long?" I demanded, my voice a low tremor. She sighed, brushing hair aside with a draftsman's flick. "Does it matter?" she said, but I stepped closer, pedals grinding under my heel. "How long, Claire?" Miles shrank back, eyes down, but she held firm. "A while," she conceded, then added, defiant, "It's not like I planned it." A while. The vagueness gouged deeper, tearing through nights I'd burned coding to keep us afloat, blind to her blueprint of lies. I wheeled on Miles. "You!" I snarled. "Get out!" He hesitated, glancing at Claire, but she nodded, and he slunk past, the balcony doors banging shut. The wind stilled, leaving her jasmine scent laced with betrayal. "Torin," she said, softer, "we can make this work. You, me, the girls. Nothing has to change." "Nothing has to change?" A hollow laugh broke from me as I lurched to the mantel where our wedding photo sat, its frame fissured from some forgotten row. My reflection glared back, a man adrift, the sea beyond churning black. I lifted the seashell beside it, a honeymoon relic, its spiral once a promise, now a weight in my hand. Its edges were smoothed by time, like our love, worn thin by secrets I'd never suspected. Claire watched, waiting, but my voice was gone. The girls' laughter drifted from their room, a fragile lifeline in the wreckage. I set the shell down, its clink a requiem in the silence. This wasn't a crack. It was a shattering, and I stood amid the debris, wondering what I could salvage. The morning after broke like a fractured dawn, the sea beyond our apartment grumbling low as if it too bore the weight of last night's ruin. I sat at the kitchen table, coffee acrid on my tongue, watching Claire glide through the wreckage with a draftsman's poise. She'd slept on the couch, or so she said, her auburn hair tangled, yet her hazel eyes burned with unshaken certainty. Lily and Ava rattled cereal bowls between us, their voices a brittle thread stitching the silence. I hadn't slept, the seashell's ghost heavy in my hand all night, its whisper a requiem for the marriage I'd coded into being. Claire set her mug down, the clink a judge's hammer. "We need rules," she declared, slicing through the girls' chatter with surgical precision. "For the open marriage. It's practical, Torin. Practical." The word seared, reducing our years, our love, to a ledger of terms and conditions. I stared at her, the man who'd burned midnights debugging code to build this life, now lost in a syntax I couldn't unravel. "Rules?" I croaked, my voice still jagged from the balcony's betrayal. She nodded, pulling a notepad from her bag, ever the designer, ever in command, and scribbled, "No overnight stays," she listed, pen tapping, "no mutual friends, no flaunting it around the girls." Her voice was clipped, a pitch to a client, not a plea to the husband she'd vowed to keep. My grandparents' clasped hands flickered in my mind, their pierce-eyed love, a compass I'd followed. This wasn't freedom. It was a leash disguised as choice. "And you?" I pressed, throat tight. "You'll stick to this with Miles?" Her pen hesitated, a crack in her polish, then she smoothed it over. "Of course," she said, too glib, too rehearsed. The girls finished eating, Lily's keen eyes lingering as she rinsed her bowl. Ava, oblivious, hugged my leg, her crumpled drawing pressed against me, a silent plea to stay her anchor. I wanted to smash the notepad, its sterile rules, but their presence held me fast. "Fine," I muttered, the word ash on my lips. "A trial. For them." Claire's mouth quirked, a conqueror's smirk, and she slid the notepad toward me like a sealed pact. I left it untouched. The sea rumbled, its pulse sinking with the fury hammering my skull, and I wondered how long I could run this broken program before it crashed. Days blurred into a fog, the rules a specter in our home. Claire flitted in and out, her client meetings stretching late, her jasmine scent trailing deceit I couldn't unsee. I anchored the girls, homework, stories, my coder's mind grasping at routine while my soul recoiled. Then, one gray morning over breakfast, Claire dropped the grenade. "It's been a while with Miles," she said, stirring her coffee like it was a footnote. "How long's a while?" I demanded, spoon clattering. She sighed, meeting my glare with icy defiance. 18 months, she said, the number a fist to my chest. 18 months. Not a slip, not a moment. A year and a half of nights I'd coded blind, trusting her smile while she'd drafted a life with him. The room tilted, the sea's roar thundering through the window. 18 months spanned Ava's birthday, Lily's science fair, the anniversary I'd slaved over salmon and dill, her grin a lie I'd swallowed whole. "You've been lying that long?" I choked, voice splintering. Claire shrugged, a designer tossing a flawed sketch. "It's not lying if you didn't ask," she said, and I nearly lunged, stopped only by Lily's voice cutting through. "Why does Uncle Miles come over so much?" she asked, standing by the sink, her 10-year-old gaze piercing. Claire faltered, her sheen cracking, but she forced a laugh. "Just a friend, Lilybug." Lily's eyes flicked to me, unconvinced, a mirror to my own unraveling trust. Ava tightened her grip on my leg, her drawing a lifeline as the blood roared in my ears. 18 months. The rules, the trial, they weren't a reset. They were a plaster over a gash she'd carved deep. I shoved back from the table, chair screeching, and staggered to the balcony. The sea sprawled gray and merciless, its waves echoing the chaos I'd missed. Claire's phone buzzed. Miles, no doubt. But I didn't turn. Her voice called, faint, but I let the wind snatch it away. I needed out. A way to rewrite this before it buried us all. That afternoon, while Claire vanished to another meeting, I wrestled with the thought. Could I tear this family apart? Or was it already gone? The question gnawed as I slipped downtown to a lawyer's cramped office. Grizzled and gruff, he leaned back as I poured out the mess, the affair, the sham rules, her late-night work. "You've got a shot," he said, tapping his pen with blunt honesty. Her instability, missed pickups, excuses. Courts hate that. Custody's in play. Custody. The word sparked defiance through the haze. Lily's doubt, Ava's hug, they deserved more than this lie. I thanked him, stepping into the salt-soaked air, the sea's growl now a war drum. Claire thought she could redraw our lives. But I'd rewrite the code. For me, for them. The pact was fraying, and I'd fight before it dragged us under. The sea gleamed silver under a fading afternoon sun. its waves murmuring secrets as I stood at the coastal park's edge, a haunt where I'd once chased gulls with Lily and Ava. Today, I was untethered. Claire's rules a chain I'd dragged for weeks, her open marriage a lie tightening with every meeting she vanished to. 18 months with Miles had hollowed me, stripped the coder who'd built this life to a husk. But the lawyer's gruff custodies in play lingered like a spark. I was through being her anchor while she drifted. So I'd messaged Sophie, Miles's sister, a familiar face from barbecues and stilted chats. She'd always been steady, her quiet kindness a salve to Claire's frost. And when I asked her here, her "Sure, Torin," hummed back, soft as a shutter's click. She appeared with her camera slung over her shoulder, dark hair snagged by the breeze, her gray eyes, keen as sea glass, locking on to mine. "Hey," she said, her voice low, and I nodded, throat parched. We walked the shore path, sand grinding underfoot, and I spilled the mess. Claire's betrayal, her sterile rules, my need to break free. Sophie listened, her lens catching a gull's arc, then hesitated, a flicker of unease crossing her face before she smiled. "You're not one for games," she said, her gaze slicing my haze. "Why me?" I faltered, then confessed. Because Claire wouldn't see it coming. It was spiteful, a jab with her own blade. But Sophie's laugh, raw, unguarded, stirred a warmth I'd forgotten. We paused by the water, her framing the horizon, me tracing her calm against Claire's storm, and I breathed, truly breathed, for the first time since that balcony shattered. Days later, the park became our quiet defiance. Sophie's world, light bent through her lens, tails in shadows, drew me from Claire's debris. We met again by a splintered pier, her camera snaring the sun's melt into the waves. I brought coffee, she brought questions, and we talked. Code, art, lives unscripted. She wasn't a rebound. She was a coast I'd stumbled onto. Claire sensed it. Her texts sharpened. "Where were you?" Despite her own vanishing acts, then snapped when she caught us. I'd taken Sophie back to the park, her laughter ringing as she snapped me skipping stones across the tide. Claire's SUV screeched nearby, her frame taut behind the wheel. She stormed out, heels stabbing the sand, her voice a lash. "What the hell, Torin? Her?" Beneath the rage, her breath hitched, a tremor of panic she couldn't mask. Sophie lowered her camera, stepping back, but I faced Claire, the sea's roar stealing my spine. "You wanted this," I said, voice even. "Your rules, your game." Her hazel eyes flared, wildfire in a storm, and she thrust a finger at Sophie. "Miles's sister? You're moving too fast, too damn close." Her voice cracked, the hypocrisy raw, 18 months with Miles, and she unraveled at me with Sophie for days. "You don't get to call that shot," I said, unflinching, and she staggered, her designer's grip fracturing as the waves jeered her collapse. Home turned heavy that night. Claire paced, her phone buzzing. Miles, calling her back to him, while I stirred pasta for the girls, their voices a frail bulwark against her tempest. Lily watched her, eyes slitted, reading the rift. Ava clung tight, her small hand tugging my sleeve. "Daddy, are you okay?" she murmured, and I knelt, smoothing her hair. "Yeah, kiddo," I said, her faith steadying me. Claire's tension simmered, her glances slicing between us until Lily paused by the stairs after bedtime. "Mom's mad a lot," she said, her 10-year-old tone quiet but piercing, and I nodded, truth too heavy to dodge. The girls slept, their breaths a cadence against the sea's growl, but Claire's fury erupted later. She cornered me in the kitchen, her hiss sharp over the sink's drip. "You're with Sophie to spite me," she spat, arms locked tight, her eyes darting like a trapped thing. "To rub it in my face." I set my mug down, the clink a full stop. "You rubbed Miles in mine for 18 months, I said, icy and low. "I'm just playing your game." Her jaw clenched, a fissure in her facade, and she leaned in, voice trembling beneath the venom. "End it, Torin. Now." The order hung, brittle as glass, but I met her stare, the sea's rhythm pulsing with mine. "No," I said, a rock against her tide. She recoiled, stunned, then fled to the couch, her phone flaring. Miles again. I turned away, exhaustion lanced with a thrill. The balcony doors shuddered, framing a sea silvered by moonlight, and I saw her packed, twisting back on her. Sophie texted then, a dusk-lit pier, gold bleeding into waves, and a gentle, "You okay?" I replied, "Yeah," and felt it this time. Claire's jealousy was her snare, her rules a trap she'd sprung on herself. Lily's trust, Ava's grip, Sophie's steadiness, they were my harbor now. I stepped onto the balcony, the salt air alive, and let the sea's murmur swallow her echo. She'd pushed me here, but I'd turned the current, and she despised me for it. The sea thrashed gray beyond the balcony, its waves clawing at the dawn as I gripped the divorce papers, their edges biting into my coder's hands. Weeks had slipped since Claire's jealous hiss in the kitchen, her order to ditch Sophie a fading snarl. I'd twisted her rules, found air in Sophie's calm eyes, but Lily and Ava, their giggles, their trust, were my core, the lines of code keeping me whole. Claire's storm couldn't drown them, not if I could stop it. The lawyer's gruff "custodies in play" had taken root, and with Sophie's steady nod over pierside coffee, I'd scrawled my name, severing 12 years with a stroke. I slid the papers across the kitchen table that morning, the sea's growl a steady pulse as Claire stared, her hazel eyes slitting. "You're serious," she said, voice flat as a blueprint, but her fingers twitched, a fracture in her polish. "For them," I answered, firm, and turned away, her silence roaring louder than the tide. She struck back fast. Days later, her legal jab landed, claiming I was unfit, twisting my time with Sophie into proof of chaos. She'd snatched her own open marriage chisel, the one she'd carved 18 months with Miles, and aimed it at me, a warped reflection of her deceit. The courtroom loomed, a stark cage of oak and murmurs, the sea's voice dulled beyond its walls. I sat, suit stiff, Sophie's text, "You've got this," warm in my pocket as Claire glared across the divide, her face a cold draft. The judge, stern with steel-gray hair, summoned Lily's teacher, a quiet woman whose words fell like clean code compiling. "Mrs. Harrow misses pickups," she said, calm but cutting. "Leaves Ava waiting, forgets lunches. Too often." My chest tightened, each miss a wound I'd patched, and she added, "Mr. Harrow's there, every day, coding with Lily, snacks for Ava." Claire shifted, her jaw clenching, but the truth rippled, unmasking her neglect. My lawyer nudged me, voice low. "She's unstable," he said, and I nodded. Claire's meetings with Miles, nights I'd coded blind, burning sharp. Her lawyer countered, smooth as oil. "Mr. Harrow's rushed into a fling," he sneered, "with his wife's lover's sister. Reckless, unfit." Claire's eyes flashed, a designer's smirk, but I held steady, Sophie's photo of Ava's sandy grin flickering in my mind. She wasn't chaos. She was proof I could rebuild. The judge's pen scratched, her gaze a blade, and I felt the balance tip. Claire's twist a gamble teetering on collapse. Miles broke her next. He'd faded since her park meltdown, his last text, a curt "I'm out," sent weeks ago when her jealousy turned feral. My lawyer dug up the thread, stark proof he'd cut loose, unwilling to moor her sinking wreck. "She's losing him," Sophie had said, her lens snaring peer shadows, and now it glared. Claire alone, her design unraveling. Her lawyer stumbled, her mask cracking as the judge pressed. "Mrs. Harrow, these afternoons, where were you?" Claire faltered. "Work." But the teacher's litany, missed recitals, broken promises, swamped her lie. The sea's echo pulsed in me, a tide of truth eroding her facade. Home shifted with the tide. Lily hovered as I cooked, her 10-year-old eyes probing my quiet. "Is Mom leaving?" she asked, voice thin, and I knelt, honest. "We're sorting it, kid," I said, and she nodded, faith firm. Ava toddled up, clutching a drawing, us by the sea, Sophie's dark hair scrawled in crayon, and I hugged her, her warmth a bulwark. Claire burst in later, her phone dead, Miles's absence a shroud. "You're poisoning them," she spat, but I shook my head. "You left them waiting," I said. And she froze, the mirror too harsh to face. The hearing dragged, testimony stacking like sea-worn planks, but Sophie steadied me. We met at the park, her camera framing the girls racing waves, their laughter a salve. "She's desperate," Sophie said, handing me a shot of Ava's grin, her voice soft but sure. "She'll claw harder." I nodded, the lawyer's instability ringing true as Claire's gambit frayed. The judge recalled us, her ruling poised like a breaker. Claire sat, rigid, her polish peeling, and I braced, Sophie's image of the girls a quiet strength. The sea beyond growled, bearing witness to her fall. The gavel fell, interim custody mine, Claire's neglect trumping her twist. She glared, a scorned architect, but I saw the ruin. Miles gone, her grip lost, the girls drifting from her tide. I stepped into the salt-drenched air, Sophie's "Told You" buzzing through, and the sea's roar sang victory, edged with the load ahead. Lily and Ava deserved a steady shore, not her churn, and I'd fight to hold it. Claire's gambit had backfired, her chisel turned inward, and I stood on the coast she'd forsaken, ready to recode our lives. The sea sighed against the shore, its foam tracing fragile lines as I stood on the balcony, interim custody papers a steady weight in my pocket. The courtroom's sting lingered, Claire's glare, the gavel's crack, but triumph soured under her unraveling shadow. She'd lost Miles, lost the girl's gravity, and now her jealousy flared, a storm I couldn't dodge. It started with texts, barbed, "Where are you?" demands, then voicemails, her voice lurching from spite to despair. "Torin, we can fix this," she'd beg, the sea's murmur muting her pleas as I erased each one. Sophie's quiet strength, her peer shots and calm, held me firm, but Claire's presence crept nearer. I'd catch her SUV near the park, her form stiff behind dark glass, staring as Sophie framed Lily and Ava racing the tide. She was a wraith now, stalking the life I was stitching back, her grip crumbling like wet sand. Her spiral coiled tighter one dusk as I took the girls to the beach, Sophie with her camera in tow. Lily sprinted through the surf, her laughter slicing the waves, while Ava tugged my hand, giggling as she showed me her blurry shot of the sea from Sophie's spare lens. Sophie knelt beside her, guiding her aim, and I felt it, a tender peace woven from their light. Then a call crackled through, a blocked number, Claire's voice, brittle and low. "You're ruining us," she hissed, and I hung up, but Lily caught it. "She's always watching," she muttered, kicking a shell, her 10-year-old eyes shadowed too deep. I crouched, smoothing her hair. "She's lost, kid," I said, softer than I felt, and her frown held, reflecting my own dread. That night, her voicemails stacked. 6, 7,
each more jagged. "You're throwing us away," she snapped, then broke. "I need you back." I played them on the balcony, the sea's growl weaving through her collapse, and wiped them clean, my thumb steady but my chest knotted. Sophie texted, a shot of Ava's sandy toes. "They're tougher than you." And I clung to it, her clarity piercing Claire's haze. But the next day, Sophie dropped the bomb. We met at the pier, her camera still as she slid me an old email, dug from a college account Claire forgot to kill. "She blocked your promotion," Sophie said, voice hushed, pointing to a date 3 years past, a job abroad I'd lost to cuts. Claire's typed fear stared back. "He'll outgrow me if he goes." 3 years of trust unraveled in her words, a betrayal older than miles, and I gripped the rail, the sea's hiss a roar in my skull. It seared, a wound beneath the scars. I'd burned nights for that shot, swallowed her bad luck tale while she'd clipped me to cage me. Sophie watched, her gray eyes soft but sure. "She's controlled you longer than you knew," she said, and I nodded, rage pulsing with the tide. Claire's SUV rolled by that evening, parked across the lot, rain streaking her windshield as she stared. I ignored it, but Lily snapped. She'd overheard Claire's latest call, spiteful and pleading, and marched to the kitchen, voice sharp. "Dad's happier now," she cut in, glaring through the line, a child's blade slashing Claire's illusions. Claire stammered, "Lily, you don't." But Lily slammed the phone down, fists tight, and turned to me. "She's wrong," she whispered, and I hugged her, her fire a bulwark. The next day, Sophie brought her old camera, guiding Ava's shaky shots. Me, the waves, Sophie's grin, and Lily splashed ahead, their joy drowning Claire's ghost. Ava beamed, showing me her blurry frame of Sophie, and I saw it, a bond threading us whole beyond me. We painted the shore with their light, the sun sinking gold, and I knew Claire's spiral couldn't reach this. But she pressed. That night, her car idled by the pier, rain veiling her as she watched, a specter in the squall. I stood firm, Lily's defiance and Ava's clicks armoring me. Sophie's hand grazed mine, her "you're enough," a murmur against the gale, and I felt it, the sea's rhythm anchoring me true. Her calls surged then, a flood of pleas. "Don't do this to me," her voice splintering like driftwood in the tide. I let them pile, unanswered, her desperation a current dragging her down. The email haunted, her sabotage a specter I couldn't unsee, and Lily's "Dad's happier" rang sharper each day. Ava's shots stacked, clumsy frames of us three, while Sophie's photos, Lily mid-laugh and me mid-breath, wove a new script Claire couldn't touch. The sea stretched dark beyond the balcony, its growl a dirge for her fall, and I held steady, her spiral a vortex she'd drown in alone. She'd carved this gulf, but I'd built a shore. Lily's steel, Ava's lens, Sophie's glow, and her rain-soaked vigil couldn't pierce it. The sea lay serene beyond the balcony, its waves whispering gentle as a breath as I leaned against the rail, divorce papers finalized in my grip, their ink a quiet end to 12 fractured years. The courtroom's clamor had dissolved, replaced by this coastal stillness, and interim custody had solidified into permanence. Lily and Ava mine, their lives unshackled from Claire's chaos. She'd battled to the last, her hazel eyes blazing in that final hearing, but the judge's gavel struck true, her neglect an anchor she couldn't unmoor. Now she sat across the kitchen table, her auburn hair muted, her voice a thread. "I'm starting therapy," she said, hands trembling as she traced the wood's grain, a vow eked from ruin. "For them, I nodded, the sea's pulse steadying me, and saw it. Not triumph, but a flicker of redemption in her shattered vows, a fragile bridge to the girls she'd strained to keep. Claire left, her SUV fading against the shore, and I felt the tide turn, a clean sweep over old wreckage. Sophie filled the void, her presence no longer a defiance but a root sinking deep. We'd grown steady, deliberate, coffee over pier sunsets, walks with the girls, her camera threading us into frames of light. She wasn't a mend for Claire's cuts. She was a coast I'd chosen, forged in trust and shared silences. That afternoon, we took Lily and Ava to the park, their laughter ringing as Sophie snapped shots, Ava chasing a gull, Lily scribbling code on a napkin I'd slipped into my pocket. "You're good at this," I said, her gray eyes meeting mine, and she smiled, warm and certain. "You too." The sea breeze lifted her words, and I knew. This was no echo of the past. It was ours, a second dawn coded anew. Then Miles pierced the calm. His call came that dusk, a voice rough with months of shadow, cracking as he spoke. "Torin," he said, pausing as the sea sighed through the line. "I'm sorry." I clutched the phone, the balcony cool beneath my feet, and he poured it out. Claire had spun him too, her control a net he'd torn free, her lies a weight he'd carried until now. "She played us both," he rasped, voice heavy with regret. And I saw it, a last knot in her web undone. "Yeah," I said, firm but quiet. "She did." He hung up, a specter released, and I stood there, the sea's peace a mirror to the freedom settling in. Claire's dominion was ash, her sabotage and strings burned out, and I was unshackled, not just from her, but from the vows I'd mistaken for holy. The girls flourished in the light. Lily sprawled across the living room coding a game on my laptop. The Brave Dad, she named it, her 10-year-old fingers weaving a hero who defied tempests. I watched, heart swelling, as she grinned up at me, her faith a cord unbroken. Ava bounded over, clutching Sophie's old camera, her 6-year-old shot stacking high. Me stirring pasta, Lily mid-laugh, Sophie's dark hair in tender blur. "Look, Daddy!" she chirped, thrusting a frame of us by the sea, and I hugged her, her spark of flame Claire couldn't quench. Sophie joined us, her photos fanned on the table, candid gleams of our new rhythm, a family recast in gold and dusk. The sea hummed beyond, its serenity a song to their bloom, and I saw they weren't just healing, they were radiant. Claire returned the next week, her therapy a tentative tether to the girls. She perched on the couch, Lily eyeing her with a guarded squint, Ava clinging to my knee, but she spoke soft. "I'm trying." Her hands twisting a frayed scarf, a plea carved from loss. Lily hesitated, her jaw tight, then softened, sliding a nod her way, while Ava offered a shy drawing, their trust thawing slow. I stepped back, the sea's whisper a cue. This was their mend, not mine to shape. Claire left, her gait less burdened, and I felt it lift, not absolution, but peace. That night, the balcony drew me, the sea vast and dark, its waves a pulse I'd thought drowned. I'd sought sanctity in vows, in a marriage I'd coded to endure, but it lived here, in Lily's steel, Ava's lens, Sophie's hand finding mine as she joined me, her "they're okay," a steady truth. We walked the beach the next day, the girls darting ahead, Lily splashing through shallows, Ava framing waves with Sophie's gentle nudge, their voices braiding with the tide's song. Sophie's camera rested, her fingers twining with mine, and I paused, the sand cool beneath me. "This," I said, nodding to them, to her. "This is it." She squeezed my hand, her smile a harbor I'd claimed, and I saw it sharp.
Love wasn't in the vows I'd grieved. It was in the grit to let them shatter, to rise from their dust. Leaves drifted down, old oaths falling with the breeze, and the sea gleamed wide, unburdened, its surface a mirror to a future unshackled. Lily beckoned me, her game idea tumbling out. Ava tugged Sophie to catch a cresting wave, and I followed. The horizon boundless, my code reborn, their light my truest vow. Looking back on this journey, I, Torin, realize love isn't in vows etched on paper, but in the courage to let go when they shatter, to rebuild from the ashes. Claire betrayed me. 18 months with Miles, a stab 3 years ago that stalled my career, and even Miles was a victim in her web of control. Yet from those ruins, I found my true shore, Lily and Ava, with their strength and light, and Sophie, who brought joy unbound by oaths. The greatest lesson is, truth always finds a way to break free, and when it does, we must choose to rise or sink. What do you think of this path? Is therapy enough for Claire to redeem herself with the kids, or was I wrong to give her that chance? Share your thoughts below. I'm curious to hear them. Until we meet again in other tales, where the sea still whispers new lessons, waiting for us to uncover.